All right, here we
What's
go.
What's up, man? How's it going, Scott Carney?
Good. Thanks for coming to my house.
Yes.
The first interview I've ever done in my house. Now it's being filmed. So this is my shade right here. My cat's gonna come and say hello in a minute. His name's Lambert. Just be really nice to him.
Yeah,
he's
vicious. Cool. Chubby little cat. Looks like Toonses a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah, man. So we're in Denver, Colorado.
We are.
Yes. So how did you end up here?
I lived in LA for a spell, and there was a fellowship opportunity for my wife up in Boulder, and we weren't married at that time, so I just chased her here. And it was at the Center for Environmental Journalism. I was writing a book at that time called What Doesn't Kill Us, and yeah, it was, and we've been here ever since. We can't afford to go back to LA. That's really what the problem is.
Right. So she had a fellowship at Colorado University.
CU Boulder. Yeah.
Okay,
so
got it.
I don't know why it's called CU, but it's University of Colorado Boulder. Yeah. So they messed up the name.
Yeah, reversed the order there,
Yeah.
right? So were you married at the time when you came out, or you chased her out?
I chased her out.
Yeah.
I basically just kept on asking her until she said yes.
That's awesome.
Totally
man.
works.
Persistent works.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Sometimes you gotta be. Wore her down, and then a year or two later, I got the same fellowship that she had, and we've been sort of here ever since.
And what's the fellowship in?
It was for environmental journalism. Okay. So I'm an investigative journalist. I write for Playboy, for Wired, for Mother Jones, for a lot of different sort of big magazines, and then books. And this fellowship was ostensibly about what is climate change? How is it working? And I got to audit classes at any subject that I wanted to for a year, and at the end of it, just be enriched. There's no you don't have to do anything. You just have to be enriched. So I was taking creative writing classes. I was taking courses on immunology, on astronomy. That was awesome. Like black holes and
Yes.
I basically took the things that I wanted to take. Maybe not the most environmentally.
Okay, so not so much the environmental stuff.
It's just the stuff that interested me. So it was all the stuff that I wanted to do in college and just never did. It's like the best free year anyone could ever have. I feel like everyone should get this opportunity, but it's probably not available for everyone, sadly.
Okay. So is it reserved for professionals or people that have a certain earned a status in some way?
Like mid-career journalists, sort of thing. It's a great opportunity, and it really let me sort of also focus on getting this book out there into the hands of everyone, because I just finished writing What Doesn't Kill Us, and so it was sort of in that time period that I was doing that fellowship.
So what contribution did all that learning at the fellowship have on you or the book?
Yeah, so What Doesn't Kill Us is about the Wim Hof Method. It was crazy Dutch fitness guru, how he uses breathing and sort of ice protocols to change and fundamentally hack his body to do different things, right? To become customized to stressful situations, to thrive in ice water, and then he literally consciously intervenes in his immune system. So those are some pretty big topics, that come out of just ice water and breathing meditation. So part of the fellowship, I was just basically studying the immune system. What do we know about the immune system? How does it work? When you dig down to that, to all the various types of cells and how they interact with each other, you can look at it as just straight chemical reactions. There's no this is just a part A clicking into part B, or you can take my weirdo look at it as the immune system is sort of conscious, it's making decisions. You look at a macrophage, which is a macrophage looks the same as an amoeba, and it wanders around your body hunting bacteria and things that it doesn't want, and it sort of sniffs. It's what are you? You're a Tony. You shouldn't be in there, Tony, and then it eats you, right? And then it goes around and says, you're a Scott cell. Okay, you're fine. And
in some ways, it's an organism in an organism.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a super organism, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way I look at the immune system to some degree. When you say consciousness, it's very loaded. It sort of thinks that it's like thinking about its grocery bill and its 401k and like, you know, bigger questions. Like, but I see consciousness sort of more like decision making in general, like, you know, value judgments that's to some very minor degree. Like, I'm not saying it's like a human, right?
Right, but there's some sort of intelligence that's autonomous, but like someone like Wim Hof can supposedly control that.
Yeah, like if you think about like one of these cells from its perspective, right? It's wandering around your body and it's sniffing things, right? And there's all these hormones going through your bloodstream, and its environment is what it knows. So, you know, cortisol releases, and it senses that its environment is literally bathing in cortisol. So it understands the language of cortisol. Well, meanwhile, when you're jumping into the ice, your cortisol levels ramp up. So there's like, you know, it doesn't know what ice is probably, right? How could it ever know that? Right. But it does know, oh God, now
there's a signal of cold.
Right, now I'm bathing in cortisol and all of the other million hormones and chemical markers that are there. So you have two environments interacting at once. So by Wim consciously changing the way he interacts with ice, changes the way that the inner biology interacts with its own environment. And so you're actually changing two sets of protocols.
Because we're jumping like kind of straight right into the wedge.
We're going
right in, man. Like the sort of autonomous nervous system where everything's controlled, you know, on its own without like conscious will. And then you have like the somatic part, which is like you can like focus on your breathing and work on that, but then there's the in-between world where you know you don't need to think about breathing, but you can,
right?
You know?
Yeah.
And so there's like, where is that like sort of influence in the middle? And you know, that's where Wim is on the cusp of as like a pioneer, and these other people that you've been trying to debunk.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I started out as like this journalist. I wrote a book called The Enlightenment Trap, which is about how the pursuit of spiritual perfection and enlightenment and, you know, all of these things that are really good, right? Bliss and whatever else. How that, if you really go down that path, you can end up being insane, right? You can end up being like, I have found enlightenment. And if you think you're enlightened, or you think you found Jesus or Allah and you're talking to him and he's giving you signals, you're freaking insane. And there's a problem there.
Yeah, or you could die.
And I'm following cases of people who actually died on these spiritual paths for that book. And so
that was almost
yeah, right. And you had this story about you being on mushrooms, finding, you know, perfect things and jump out a window.
Yeah, exactly. I thought I could fly, and I'm lucky I'm still here.
Yeah.
But because I was on that path of enlightenment, I was seeking, you know, that ultimate consciousness, you know, that people were talking about, and thinking like happiness, and I just got high off my own supply. It wasn't even just mushrooms, but it was just the act of meditation, like constantly, and like isolating myself from the world, you know. And then, you know, in some ways I became sensitive and intuitive, and there's some sort of upsides that come from these practices, but there are certainly some downsides if you're not learning how to integrate with being in the body, being in the world, you know, versus like escaping, which I think a lot of people go into these things like seeking these answers of like their life and like why we're here, and like what's their like deeper reasons of like all this existence, and then somehow you get trapped in like getting high off your own supply and the dogmas that come from a teacher or a guru.
Totally. And like you start thinking that this external message that's coming to you is figured out. Like the Buddha, for instance, knew what was up. And if you could just be the Buddha, you would be perfect, right? And people get this idea in their mind, and, you know, or be Jesus, right? It doesn't really matter the path you go on. But the thing is, if those people were real people, which they probably were real people, right? Then they were probably just as fucked up as you and me, to some degree. I mean, I'm sure they had some, you know, they had these great insights, but, you know, there's one of my favorite stories about the Buddha, right? It's this guy named Migalandika, and the Buddha had attained enlightenment and was getting a group of people who really dug his work. And he was like, all right, cool, they really understand what I'm doing, and I want to teach them the method to get to enlightenment. And the method to get to enlightenment is to totally accept death, and decay and the inevitability of that thing, which is still a very central Buddhist message. His method, though, was to examine rotting corpses in what they called charnel grounds. So you would go into a graveyard, and these would be the corpses of prostitutes and paupers, and they were just literally left out above ground to decompose. So he was like, you go into this place, you sit and you watch those corpses decompose, and think about your corpse, also the inevitability. And this is the way you will get to enlightenment, because you realize that it's all sort of the same. And so the Buddha taught this thing to his monastery. I think his monastery was in Bihar, Nepal at that point. And they said, like, all right, peace out. I'm going to go to a cave and meditate for a while, because this is what he did. He cut off all access to the world and meditated for his own spiritual practice. Okay, so then flashback over to the monks, and they're all sitting in these charnel grounds, and the story says that they start getting really depressed and suicidal, and they see their own death coming, and then they realize that what they need to do is take their own lives right then and there, and so they start committing suicide.
Wow.
And then all of the monks in a monastery start committing suicide. Some of those that don't want to or can't do it for whatever reason, right? They essentially hire one of the monks named Migalandika to go and assassinate them or cut their throats. And so Migalandika then goes and murders all the monks. And it's sort of willing, right? It's not like straight up murder. It's like, you killed me so that I can go get to the next level. Right. Buddha comes back a little later, and there's only like 4 monks left in his monastery. And he's like, whoa, guys, this is not what I wanted at all. And then the Buddha's like, all right, I'm going to excommunicate Migalandika and some other people and be like, all right, so now from now on, the new method is you're going to study, you're going to focus on your breath instead. This is the new thing. Forget corpses, focus on your breath. And this is how you get sort of the very first breathing meditation sort of come out of this through Buddhism. You can look this up. Like if you don't believe me.
I was going to say, man, like this is, you never hear this part of the story about Buddha.
It's in the Pali Canon, the Pali Canon is one of the oldest recorded Buddhist teachings that were written on palm leaves that were then preserved in Sri Lanka. Some of the earliest writings, and they are the ones that monks will read at sort of the more advanced level. But you can totally find it, Migalandika, Migalandika. You will find his story out there,
and you're that.
And you're like, what?
And so they like share this information like after you're already like.
But what it shows is that even the Buddha, this enlightened guy who was already enlightened at that point, they said, can still have pedagogical problems, right? He can still be like, oh, I messed up, right? I am not a perfect person. Mm-hmm. And then maybe not every sort of crazy spiritual practice that works for some people, because I'm sure that meditation is very powerful. It can work for some people.
Yeah, people like go to cemeteries and like lie there. Some people get like buried like up to their neck, or like they actually get buried and there's like a straw coming out so they can breathe.
Because that's all fucked up. But
I know. But these are the things that people are actually doing out there, like to modern day.
Right, and there's a whole tradition in Tibetan Buddhism called Chud. CHO with an umlaut D is how we spell it in English. Chud, how it's pronounced, which is course meditation, which is, you find a baby bird and you look at the baby bird until it decomposes. Like, this is something that is still taught in the modern traditions. It's not to say that practice in and of itself is the worst practice in the world. I don't recommend it, but for some people, maybe they get an insight out of it. But the thing is, not every technique works for every person.
Right.
And we got this crazy story that's like 2,800 years old that says, and it can go not just bad, but really fucking bad.
Yeah, well, there's so many cases of history with even like religious wars and that kind of thing where people are like slaughtering. Or
like ISIS right now, like these guys think that if they do this act, they will go to heaven, right? I mean, and so they know the ultimate reality, and the ultimate reality is whatever their conception is, 40 virgins, or I'm sure it's more complex than that, right?
Right.
But when you only believe in that ultimate reality, then you forget about the reality that you're in, which is where we are, where we're talking.
Yeah.
Then you're not beholden to this reality. So you can do something like blow yourself up in a suicide thing and kill bunches of people, which you're probably not actually down with. Like if you actually knew the terror that you created, the rifts in those families, if you were actually part of those relationships, you probably would not be into that. You're probably not that sort of psychopath. But instead, what you're taught, or what these people intuit or learn, is that that what happens here is not real in some sense, and the real is this other enlightenment, heaven, whatever thing. And every religion has its problem. It's not
right.
You know.
Yeah, I mean that's even like something that I'm very passionate about with flow and like deep into it. But there are some downsides that come with that state where you can be kind of manic, and then like on the backside of it, you have this massive crash, like you're hungover, like from anything.
Oh,
whether
totally.
it's like alcohol or psychedelics. You need like a recovery period, so it's easy to sort of beat yourself up, you know, during that period where like your monkey mind now like on hyperdrive.
Oh, totally.
And you know, or like for example, like people in this world and they find it is something that's like you go to school, which almost feels unnatural. You have to sit in chairs and then people are telling you what to do. So like from a young age, you either buy into it or you question it. And a lot of people are questioning, are like rebels, and they meet other rebels and like they start partying and doing these other things. Like here, like I have a crew, I feel good.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it ends up pretty bad. And it's the same thing with some of these religions or even benign meditation practices, that you have these sort of enlightened type of satori moments, and then you think you know the answer to these things, and then all you want to do is those things. You just get addicted to your own high.
When you said that you have this sort of come down after flow, what do you mean by that? What sort of examples can you give where that happens?
Yeah, the most closest would be similar to like, you know, partying all night, you know, drinking, feeling superhuman, so your inhibition's gone, your monkey mind shuts off. You can, for me, I was like courage to talk to girls, I'm funny, I feel like me fully, right? The next day, it's like, you know, you're barfing your brains out.
Yeah, but that's not really flow as much as it is intoxication. Like, what about like, you know, one of the things you do is like throw kettlebells, for instance, right? Is there a hangover from that sort of event?
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of what I was leading to, is that like there's a drop off in like performance and a sense of well-being, like after you come out of this like really high state of flow. So like whether it was a high state of like partying all night or a high state of like ultimate macro flow, you come out of it and the next day you just like can't get up in the morning. You just feel like exhausted, tired. Your critical mind's like thinking like, man, I just want to go back to that state. But now I'm like back into reality in this world, which when you're in flow, you are in this world, but you're seeing more than you are normally in a normal waking consciousness. So when you're in flow, you literally feel like you're a superhuman or a super being or a superhero, because you're doing things that you're like even surprising yourself, like, how am I doing this? How am I like witnessing all this? And then you come out of it. So it's like that movie, The Limitless, where all of a sudden, like...
Which actually wasn't a very good movie, but
but I think they like tried to like get to that place where you do have this sort of like manic, super consciousness, and then the next day it's like
So I find this really interesting, because this is obviously the sort of things that I'm looking at in my book, but the way you're explaining it, which I like, is that, so in the hangover, the drunk state, right, there's an intoxication, and if we talk about hangovers from a clinical perspective, we're talking about you're sort of dumping neurotransmitters, and you're dehydrated, so we look at chemical reasons for that hangover, right? Which makes sense, because chemicals are real, right? But what you're also adding on top of that is saying that these sensations that you're having of those feelings of talking to girls and being easy, so you're normally closed off and this makes you more gregarious, and these other feelings, those highs are not just chemical signals, but they're also sort of these emotional things that exist in an emotional state I actually I don't know where they sit, but they exist in this sensational state.
Right.
And then the next day, while you're going through that neurotransmitter chemical down, you're also going through this emotional down, and we sort of have to deal with that on its own page.
Yes.
Yeah. That's cool.
It's a combination. So I mean, with my experience with psychedelics, it was similar. I mean, it just depends on the dose as well. But there is this sort of like, okay, I just like.
You do psychedelics? You druggy?
The fuck? Oh shit!
Oh, I got you, man.
Damn! I just said it.
That's how investigative journalism works. It can crimes.
I got no shame in announcing it. Hopefully, the laws will change. But obviously, you can go to places, other countries where it's allowed. It's just crazy because you have these like sort of epiphanies, So just imagine having like an aha epiphany moment for hours.
Right.
Sometimes like my longest like flow would be when like during creativity. Like I remember when I wrote a book. Not many people know I have a book, but I remember like I don't remember writing it. I just remember like it being published on Amazon.
Are you sure you wrote? You might have hired a ghostwriter.
Yeah, I think something like that. I just became a ghost, but yeah, it's wild. Like the type of experience that you have, and then it's like kryptonite. Like all of a sudden, you're not even like Superman anymore. So. But the emotions that come with it, psychedelics, you start to, as you know, with the ayahuasca, right? Like you understand, like, okay, I'm just doing some like internal cleansing of my psychological state, my past, the future, the present. Like it all comes together, and then you get these insights. But then now you have to do the work. Like you come back into the world after you sort of go into these places which were like tapping, whether it's with Wim Hof and the ice and breathing, Buddha, and like there's all these methods. Some people like jump off of cliffs or jump out of airplanes and then like they get there, right? Big waves, or they use electrical gadgets, whatever, right?
So you have this thing that hooks up to people's ears, zaps them a lot. You did this to me like 4 months ago or something like that. Yeah, that's wild.
I know, right?
So we're gonna do that later too.
There's all these different pathways you can get to this place, but a lot of these things are methods or like even cults. They're missing a lot of that like integration part.
Right.
And they didn't have like psychologists back in those times, like everything was just like wizardry and
Well, it all depends on who you were talking to back then too. Like, what we forget is that these ancient traditions, right, are ancient not only because they were so far back in time, but now we are so far removed from them that they have been reinterpreted over and over and over again. And this was something really cool that I found in the Enlightenment Trap, that book, where I look at how we get tantra in the world today, right? In tantra, Buddhism, you've heard of tantric sex, right? But there's
everybody here,
right. There's a lot more to it than tantric sex, but there is tantric sex that's totally a part of it too. But it's way deeper than that as well. And so what happened in ancient Tibet was that Buddhism had made it to Tibet, and they transformed from a sort of a more animistic religion to Buddhist religion. But to get the books, to literally get a book to Tibet at that time, required walking over the Himalayas, right? And walking over the Himalayas is hard, it's cold, there are tigers, there are bandits. It takes you like 10 years to go back over, learn the language, and then come back. So it was a real investment to make that happen. The only thing that made it worth it was to come back with a book that people wanted to read, right? and so they would send these monks over, and they initially got the sutras, which are the intro Buddhist stuff, the stuff that we normally think about as Buddhism. And then they ran out of sutras to bring back and translate and spend their 10 years on. And so they're like, well, why send more people if we can't get better books? So they started delving into like magical traditions, because who doesn't want to get like, oh, here's how you get a superpower, here's how you get to fuck people, here's how you get to this stuff. And so they kept on going more and more esoteric, because to make the journey worth it, to make your bestseller, your, Lhasa Times bestseller, you had to get
hook people.
You had to get a hook.
Yeah.
So what happened in Tibet was you get this very sort of out there religion, which and you can still get spiritual lessons.
In the art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You can get there. I mean, there's great stuff in it, but it just gets more. It has got pushed more and more magical, and then
it gets more and more perverted.
Perverted. I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
But what I'm going to say is it gets more sensational.
Sensational. Okay.
And then so that happened. And then it created a religion that sort of stuck there. And they were pulling from Hindu texts. They were pulling from magicians. They were pulling from anyone that they could find to get this sort of tantric teachings. Then fast forward to colonial times, 1800s, 1700s in India. You have all these British people coming over, finding the Hindu texts and translating them and fucking up the Hindu religion in numerous ways. And then we wanted more and more and more and more. So what they were finding got weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder. As you talk to if I want to talk to you about something, let's talk about flow. And then you tell me all your stuff about flow. I'm like, hey, that's really cool. But how can we go deeper? And you're like, oh, I don't know. Eventually you're going to end up in sex and magic and levitation. Like it's just going to fucking happen.
Right.
And this happened with the Brits too. And there was this thing called the Theosophical Society, 1870s, where these people were literally after translating all of the texts out there, they found weirder and weirder texts. They started talking to spirits that weren't there, and then all of this stuff gets packaged into the yoga and the meditation is now popular. Now we've forgotten the Theosophical Society. Now we're in Ram Dass, and we're in what's his name, Deepak Chopra,
and Wayne Dyer.
Yeah. And they all have something cool, right? Because there is something that's original in that tradition, this ancient tradition, but it's also mediated through all of these lenses of history that get us to where we are today.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. It's just thinking about even Nazi Germany, how they were influenced by all this occult stuff and took it too
far. And they love the swastika. That's a Hindu symbol. Right?
Nobody knows that either, right? There's just that association with that symbol, but it's just wild, how down a rabbit hole you can go with these things and end up either fucked up, mentally, or you're deranged or dead, know. And then so I remember you wrote that book about that one guy that basically it's a cult leader who said that he was appointed as a lama or something, right?
Yeah, this is the Enlightenment drought. So the history that I'm giving you is all the subtext to the actual crazy story, people getting stabbed and crazy sex cults and all that fun stuff that we want, right? But the interesting thing is that even in these crazy things, there's some heart of purity and interest. And sometimes the techniques that work for one person in that group really don't work for another person in that group.
Right.
The fun part of being alive is you get to experiment with shit, right? And then what you need to retain is sort of this active tether to reality at some point and be this is good. What you're using the word integration, which is a great word. It's now I've done this crazy shit. Now I'm going to step back for a week or two and look at the crazy shit I did. And is that good for me? Is that bad for me? No judgment, but let's judge it.
There's nothing wrong with the applied proper use of judgment. Right? And so you look at what were the upsides of, for example, flow. What were the downsides? So let's toss the downsides, keep the upsides, and just keep sort of improving and evolving, and it's just funny, you do get this up level effect where you're maturing that I've noticed as I get older and I get into this stuff.
You got gray in your beard now. Last time there was no gray in it, and that was 4 months ago.
Boom. And man, it's just it's wild to see your own development, but at the same time see where let's say people see your change and then they want to know what you're doing, and then there's the whole trap of power and influence, and then so you're teaching, next you have a bunch of followers, you're you know, and you're not teaching hey, listen, I'm teaching you, don't follow me, follow the teachings,
right.
Learn from it, get better, but they're looking at you you're a rock star.
You're
right?
perfect. Yeah, this is always the problem with gurus, is that if they had something good, if they start presenting themselves as perfect, and some don't, right? Like the Dalai Lama is pretty good. I'd be like, I'm just a monk, right? I know you think I'm enlightened, and I'm this
thousand-armed came
God.
Out of nowhere, and I was the chosen one because I passed all these tests.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, actually, I'm a normal dude, and he's great at that. And there's lots of great leaders who are out there like, but there's also these leaders who really think that they're perfect, and then they're isolated, and then they have no peers, and then
there's no scientific critique or somebody like saying, hey, you got a blind spot over there.
And this is actually why I like, so you never find like, here's this enlightened Hindu guy, and here's this enlightened Muslim guy, and here's this other enlightened Buddhist guy. They never hang out with each other like, yeah, you're right? They don't agree. They're always like, nah, he's fucking wrong. This is a problem. And why I like Wim Hof, to go back to full circle to that first experience, is you meet Wim, and dude's a madman. Right, he's out there, and you're like, if you get to know him, right, he does these really cool feats. He does, has great control over himself, and there's this like pure, amazing part of him. But there's other total chaotic, like really bad habits, little boy who's like, you're fucked up, man. And the thing about Wim, which is great, is he looks at you, he's like, yeah, I'm totally fucked up.
He owns it. Yeah, it's awesome.
He owns it, and then you're like, oh, well, now I can sort of trust you because now we know you're fallible, and now I realize I have to engage my critical senses when I'm talking to you, because if I'm not engaging my critical senses, then I'm an idiot, right? It's just so apparent that you're an idiot if you're following exactly what Wim Hof does, which makes his teachings really useful, because then you can experiment with his teachings, and you have to be engaged, because you're aware that your teacher is not necessarily always on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then back to like the ice and like the external.
Yeah, the ice becomes the teacher.
The teacher, right? It's a mirror, because you jump in there and like everything comes up, right? And then you learn to like breathe into it and learn to like control these feelings and these reactions, both psychological and physiological.
And it comes. And the first time I jumped into the ice, like the proper ice water, it was a waterfall by Wim Hof's house. And I jumped in, and he was like, you have to stay here a minute. And I made it like 20, 30 seconds tops, and I was out. And I was crying at the end of it because all this shit comes up. And it's this battle with you and the ice, but it's really a battle between yourself and whatever reactions that you've encoded that ice means. Like your own insecurities, your own thoughts about your physical self, your spiritual self, whatever it is. It sort of triggers these responses. And the beauty is that once you realize from an intellectual level that honestly 30 seconds, a minute, up to 5 minutes in this really cold 30-degree water will not kill you. Like physiologically, it ain't gonna do it, right? So everything that's happening there is emotional. And that's the beauty of this ice water, because by controlling your responses in the ice, you're controlling your responses in a myriad of other aspects of your life.
Which is neat, because for me, knowing Wim as well, and being around him and seeing all of that and his craziness and saying that he's not a guru, and like some things I've heard of movies called Not Your Guru. But people worship it. But the thing is, like, you can take that knowing and go into other places in the world, whether you're like socially, I don't know, like hard to communicate with people, or you're shy, or like introverted, and you can now start to like consciously walk into all these uncomfortable situations in your life. So there's a transfer from like the ice that it's hard to get anywhere else. Maybe psychedelics, but I think it's just a way safer thing to do, even though you can get messed up in ice as well. I've seen people do that.
But I don't think actually you can even get it through psychedelics, because the thing about psychedelics, it's a chemical process that goes on into you ingest something, right? It goes into your body, and it's a chemical thing fucking essentially with your brain. I mean, there are some other physiological things, but essentially your neurochemistry that's being messed with. With the ice, what's really interesting is it's initially a somatic experience, which means it's a physical experience. It's coming from your nerves, and then it hits your brain. And so there's this Tibetan tradition which is called Pumo, which is the you've maybe heard of like monks sitting in like on Himalayan peaks, and they're doused with water and they melt the snow around them with their body heat, right? This is called Tumo. It's ancient and it's well documented that it works, right? We've known since the 50s. We've heart monitored them and brain scanned them, and
they take a wet rag and they dry it in the cold. Yeah,
totally. And so to learn Tumo takes about 10 years to master. And the reason it takes it is because it goes from mind to body. So you start by visualize. You first become a decent meditation practitioner, and then you start visualizing certain gods, and certain gods do things, and then you imagine yourself as a god. It's this long process to really get this. And then essentially what you're doing is that from your brain, by using these visualizations, you're triggering the neurochemical response that then triggers something in your body, right? So that's Tumo, and it works.
So it's like inside out.
Inside out.
Yeah.
Wim is outside in.
Right.
Wim throws you in this environment, and it's like, well, you better learn, because you're fucked if you don't.
And then he starts laughing.
Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden, you learned. Because your body, and there is some mental things that you're doing while you're in the ice, but the environment directly triggers those responses in you, and you have
to like
master.
primal. They've been there since evolution. Like,
sure. Every mammal has this response, and probably some non-mammals have these responses too, and it just triggers it, and then oh my God, you're triggering this response that we live in 72 degrees all the time. We live in this total bath of perfect environment. Now we're feeling a sensation that we may have never felt in our life before, and then you realize it's just sensation. And then this is why you instead of taking 10 years to learn it like Tumo, you learn the Wim Hof Method in a week, and like I got it. I get it. I'm talking to the ice. Me and the ice, we're in conversation.
Yeah, there's this switch that comes on, like you can feel it. It's hard to describe, but it's like a knowing.
Yeah, you shouldn't describe. Well, we can try, and you should read a book called "What Doesn't Kill." It's available on Amazon. I mean, you can totally describe it, but really, the language is of sensation.
Yeah. So with the psychedelic part, that's like sort of the inside out, because now you're thrown into, let's say, you're seeing like hell.
Sure.
Like, in that moment you're induced into hell, and so you have the choice to either freak out, or you could just say with a guide, or you just intuitively know, like, okay, this shall pass. Right. And you just breathe through it, and you witness everything, and you don't take it personally. And then when you come out of the other side, it's almost like, I think the movie like Wizard of Oz like captured it well, because like Dorothy goes down this like adventure, and it goes like really haywire and sour at the like towards the end, and then she's back in like Kansas, and so it's like a great figurative analogy or a metaphor or something. So the way I see it, people have a good guide, and it's exposure therapy in some ways, but it's mental, and then you come back in this world, and you can now start to base your like demons or things that you thought were scary, but you're like, wait a minute, I just went to hell. This is like pales in comparison.
Sure. And I like to think of psychedelics also from this environmental thing, right? It is inside out, but it does create an internal mental environment, right? And now we are in this space, and that space may all be in my head, but it's still sort of, you use those same skills to deal with it. But it is a little different than the physiological first, because we are going from brain chemistry first. And maybe that hell you are seeing, right? What is that, right? Are you seeing the real reality of hell?
Is it projection, right? Or is that like just a thing made up in your head, or is it really like in this world, but we're only seeing like this dimension right now, like sober, but then all of a sudden you're like in this dimension, and now you're opening portals that are here, but we just can't see it. Who knows? Like,
I mean, we can take some stabs at what's going on, right? We can sort of do scans and metabolic testing, and one way that psychedelics are described is that your brain usually processes sensation through pathways that are well known, right? Sight goes in through certain pathways, hits your brain at a certain brain structure first, it goes to another brain structure, goes to another brain structure. With psychedelics, what seems to happen is that the compartments between those brain structures get more loose. And so something that usually processes something first is actually also getting processed by this other part at the same time. So it becomes a sort of very internal experience. And so what might happen is your visual field is being processed by the space where you process emotions. And so that's why something looks so real. Like you actually sense it, you actually sense that as a real thing. Your brain says, no, that is real. But really what you're seeing, perhaps, right, is you happen to think about your mother, right? And you happen to think about this thing that happened with your mother. And now you're seeing your mother in front of you like a real person,
yes,
because your emotional center is in your visual cortex.
Yeah, like they just merge together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you take like, let's say you put like orange glasses on, lenses, and then you put like a purple one on top of that. And all of a sudden, but before it was clear,
right?
So now you're like combining lenses, and then it's just like it creates this weird looking movie,
right?
You know, and it's real in the moment.
Yeah.
it's real to you. What's crazy is, you know, I know a friend of mine. He's a well-known doctor, and he said that when he was in a psychedelic experience with somebody else, and they had this shared experience, the same experience, then he goes, okay, this is not just happening in my brain, but it's happening to somebody that's like not connected to me
in a physical, obvious way.
And they saw the same exact thing, and so then he started to go, okay, there's something deeper than just chemistry, you know, in the brain neurons. So
and so that happened to me recently as well. So in my next book, it's called The Wedge. It's taking the principles of the Wim Hof Method, and we're, you know, because Wim Hof Method is essentially breathing in cold and mindset, right? Those are the three components. What happens if we don't use cold? What if we use heat? What if we use sleep, sex, sound, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And there's some sections on psychedelics, and I went down to Peru to do some ayahuasca, which is interesting enough. That whole sentence is very important. I went to Peru to do ayahuasca, so we're talking about a chemical.
Wait, you do drugs?
I did drugs, but it was legal where I did. I would never break the law in America.
Right.
So actually, the being in Peru is a very important part of this, because all the sensations and all that new stuff that's going around, because I've never seen Peru before, I'm encoding information in a new way. Add to that a psychedelic, add to that a shaman, who is a guy singing songs, and it's total darkness, and like now we have these 9 or 10 novel things going on at once, and it was a very powerful, very interesting experience because of that. I was going somewhere with this, and it was going to be really brilliant. Now I've forgotten.
That usually happens when you're like feeling.
So here's one of the things that is interesting.
The shared experience.
The shared experience.
Yeah.
So on the first night I did 10 days down there, at 3 ayahuasca ceremonies. On the first night I was hanging out there with a photographer, and we both did ayahuasca. We're sitting next to each other, and we're both in pitch black, and we're looking out at this field of blackness plus shaman singing songs, and you know, I see this beam of light, right, coming down from the roof, and it's probably, let's say, 1.5 feet wide, and it doesn't reach all the way to the floor. It's only like 5 feet long, and it's sitting in the middle of this space, and we're both and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, okay, there's a beam of light. Isn't that interesting? Okay, and that's one of the only visual things that I had happen on this experience. The next day, I'm talking with a photographer, and he's like, yeah, I saw this beam of light. It was in the middle of the room, and we were like, what? Because like, what signal? We were sitting next to each other, so there's our signals that go between people. Like right now, you and I are talking, so that's a signal, and it's being coded neurologically. So we are sending stuff all the time, but we weren't sending that much between the two of us. And to have a shared hallucination makes you wonder, well, what are we seeing? And so Aldous Huxley, right, one of the first psychedelic guys, posited that what's really happening is that we have all this sensory hardware in our body that's getting in tons of information, sound, sight, touch, and and it goes into the brain raw. And what the brain's role is not to accurately tell you what's going on out there. What the brain's role is to tell you what's useful to you right now in the world that you live, so you can pass on your genes and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So his argument is that what psychedelics do is turn off the filter that we have of all that information coming in, impair the brain so that we don't have that filter, which allows us to be effective, but we actually see the raw data. And there could be something to that. I mean, honestly, the state of psychedelic research right now is getting more and more promising all the time, but it's still in shambles compared to a lot of other science that's out there.
Right.
So, but it's interesting to think that most people who get knocked on the head, right, with a hammer, end up fucked up, right? But some people who get knocked on the head with a hammer are suddenly really good at math.
Right,
Or
savants,
right.
Play music, speak multiple languages, yeah.
And so impairment doesn't necessarily always have to mean damage, although it usually does. Don't hit yourself on the head with a hammer.
Yeah.
It's a really bad method for this.
I know, it's just like the chances of you getting hit in the head and having, like, now all of a sudden you're a superpower, like you're superhuman, you know?
It does happen.
I know.
It does happen.
It's so wild, like, so that, like, gets into, like, destiny, chance, like, meaning, you know, synchronicities, because when you are in these sort of states and you see, like, intuition, all this stuff starts to, like, unfold, and you hear about, like, cognitive biases and, like, you know, all these. So you're, like, putting all this together, at least for me, and I'm like, okay, am I really seeing, like, the actual, or am I just seeing a projection, or am I seeing, like, a super version of reality, or, you know, so
you're seeing something,
obviously. But yeah, it's just like trying to, like, distill, like, when I'm in flow and have these, like, insights. Is that like a
I just noticed we had the same scar. You see this? Now turn your hand over.
Oh.
Boom.
Oh,
look at that.
Crazy, man. Yeah, that was the flight out the mushroom window.
I fell off my bike 2 weeks ago.
Wow, synchronicity, yeah. Right? So things like that, it's like we're going through reality every day, and we have, like, our past, our stories that we tell ourselves, and then there are just moments where we, like, hit brilliance.
Right.
And then on the back end of that, you're like, how did I do that? I want to replicate that, duplicate that. Like, it's often possible. And so, you know, but at the same time, like, someone around you may have seen the changes. They get uncomfortable with your change. So they start projecting their stuff on you, or they're into it and they want to learn. So there's just so many things going on when we're interacting with other conscious beings. Or whether they're you know, like, they're just stuck in a rat race or something. There's, like, all this stuff going on with people.
We're all networked in so many different ways. Like, here's another crazy brain study. So your brain has 2 hemispheres, right? And it's connected by the corpus callosum, which is a neural structure right in the middle. If you cut that, which again I don't recommend, you cut that, the 2 sides of the brain can't communicate. And one side of this brain controls speech. So when you're talking to someone, you're talking to that side of the brain, right? But you can do these tests where the other side of the brain can actually do finger motions and control other things on its side. And if you give one side of the brain, so literally like covering an eyeball and asking it a question, and then cover the other eyeball and ask it the same question, you can get different answers from one person because their corpus callosum was cut. Does that mean we're 2 people? Or does that mean that what we think of as consciousness is actually about networking in general between conscious things? Remember the amoeba, the macrophage, and all that? You know, now the brain hemispheres are talking. Now your gut is talking.
The gut, and then the microbiome.
And then I'm talking to you right now, but I'm also talking to the person in the who's listening to the podcast. And all of these interactions make all together a big superorganism, like a big, like, you know, whatever I think Scott is really sort of a tangential, exists right now in this moment because of this interaction. But this is not the same Scott that married my first wife, right? To some degree, that Scott was stuck in his time, and he might recognize this guy, but it's really about the present context and then how these contexts get mediated between all of the infinite factors that honestly are too complex for probably us to understand, which is where what you said, intuition is really important. It's not always right, but it processes at a different place.
Yeah, the other thing, counter intuition, right? So that's like a whole nother like field of study where you know what you think it's not, it's actually the opposite.
Yeah,
it's crazy. So wow, man, we just
what are we talking about, man? It's been almost an hour, I think. What do we talk about now? Where do you want to go?
Well,
or do we want to just let our listeners just relax for a little bit? Like, let's talk about Hawaii. What was it like to grow up in Hawaii?
Oh, well, I actually grew up in San Francisco, but
okay. What's Hawaii like? I've never been there.
Really?
Yeah, never been.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's why I've gone like pretty much every year the last 20 years. So, yeah, it's one of those like amazing, heavenly, blissful places. Like you just the moment that you can see the island after like flying over like 5 hours of ocean, and then you see this piece of land, and it just, the way it's shaped, the color, the green, like the combination between that green and like the Pacific blue, and then the time of day, the way that the airplane like approaches, depending on which island you show. So when I like first arrived, I saw like Honolulu. So like it was like basically like LA on paradise, right? Okay. I was just like, whoa, that looks kind of wild, right? So we had a layover just for a few minutes. Everybody got off to go to Oahu. People are going to Maui. I stayed on, and then we took off. And then as we approached Maui, it was like a whole other kind of world, because now you're seeing like these lush green tropical mountains, and then like the reddest dirt.
Oh, man.
And then like a rainbow, and you know, it was just and then different pockets of the ocean where it's like the most aquamarine blue you've ever seen, and then like a real dark, rich blue.
It sounds like paradise, man. I really have to go.
Oh, dude,
it's like,
you have to go. And then like the thing is, like the moment that they open the hatch, and like
you smell it.
You smell it, and you like your senses just go. Like seriously, like what the fuck is it? This is like unlike anything you've ever, especially if you grew up in like urban environments. Yeah. The closest is like going to nature in the mountains and the ocean and stuff like that. But usually, it's just like that whole combination, the smell, the sight.
So I used to live in India for years, and so traveled back and forth. I lived there 6 years total. I speak Hindi pretty well, right?
Wow.
But right now, when I'm talking, my Hindi is probably gonna be really bad. Like if I was gonna talk to you right now, my Hindi sort of sucks. When it comes back, this is crazy. I'll get on a plane. I'll go to India, and you know, you're in plain air. I'm looking outside, and there's India coming behind me. Okay, cool. And then the plane lands, and they open up the door, and that like noxious burning plastic bag, third worldy scent hits me.
The smell.
And like boom, Hindi's back.
It's back. Yeah, it's like that's what's so weird about why I travel so much is because of those. It's almost like you're going to another dimension in some weird way. Like with technology, we're like in a metal tube with wings, like supersonic across the ocean. And you end up in another world, which took like forever for people to ever like.
Before.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then,
you came from San Francisco this morning.
I know.
To Denver, and it took you like 4 hours.
And it's like a mind fuck sometimes, because like you go to these places and you're like, am I dreaming right now? Because it does feel like a dream when I was in India too. Like it's like this rich world that you're not used to, the way like traffic rolls and how people are like so packedly tied with each other, and it's just like chaos, but there's order to it. And, and then it's just like, am I back in like the 1950s when I'm like in Gandhi's time with these railroad cars? And you know, and then like you go to the bathroom, there's like a hole in the bottom of the floor, and that's like, you know,
that's your bed. You poop onto the tracks.
The tracks, and there's people living along the tracks, and there's trash everywhere, and but there's all these like vibrant colors, you know, and the food is amazing, and but then you see like Indian people, and they have this stern, like angry look on their face, but the moment you ask for like help or direction, they like light up and they just shake their head like a bobblehead doll. And it's so cute. So Hawaii is that way. Like there's aspects that's westernized, but when you go deeper in, you know, when you get more into like the traditional Hawaiian cultures, and it's just really neat because there is that weird like sort of trigger in the brain that like now you're part of that world, and you like integrate into that, and you start to learn their language, their customs, their food, and then you go away and you go back to like the mainland, and then you go back into urbanization. But you bring a little bit of that with you. You know, like so like the old Scott that was married before. You know, you still had that party, but you've like matured and evolved to where you are now in that present context, right? And
there's something that has existed that's continuous between the two. But you know, what was it like to be? So here's the thing that we're going to change subjects very briefly here. So like one of the things that happened when I was doing ayahuasca was that I started thinking about my past, right? As it's very common on psychedelics, and I saw myself as a kid, and the thought came across my mind, right, like a banner ad. Like, what was it like? What was your childhood bedroom like? And I was like, okay, well, let me think about that, right? And so I thought about it. So there was a window over here, and there's a poster. There was my bed, and the bathroom was across the hall. My sister was across the hall, and I just started thinking about those particular. There was a vacuum in that closet over there, and like sort of picture it together. And once I started thinking about it, then boom, then I felt like a kid, right? I actually like sort of saw myself probably like. The image was probably like a picture of myself that I'd probably seen more recently, right? But I saw that kid, and I was like, oh, that was me. And then for a brief moment, for like 2 or 3 minutes, I'm like, oh, I am that kid, or I was that kid. And it was all these they felt sort of like new emotions, but ones that I also remembered at the same time. When was the last time you did that, right? When was the last time you thought about those experiences and put yourself in that environment, and all that triggers these things? So if I was thinking about, Scott, who was in a previous marriage, there are things that are very familiar, but there's also things that are very, very different that were influencing you, and that meant different things to you then than they do now.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, I was married before, and when I look back, and it was like, wow, I was in some ways a different person than I am now, because I've like learned so much, and like I'm still friends with my ex-wife, and we can laugh about a lot of stuff that was like, you know, hard at the time, you know,
right.
And you know, in some ways that like I know that I've healed, because before I used to like replay the same stories. I'm like, why did it fail? What did I do wrong? Like I was a bliss junkie. I was seeking enlightenment. Like all these different things were happening, and at the same time, like I owned my shit. And what was cool is that she also owned her shit, because she loved to like her way of feeling love was like conflict. So she would always like try to like instigate some sort of like fight with me, and then at a certain point I just no longer like played that game,
right?
And so she felt like I didn't love her, but that pattern started repeating with her next few relationships after
and
that.
She saw a pattern.
She saw a pattern, right? So she was able to like basically recognize that, and then grow and mature, and then come back to me and say, I'm sorry, you know.
That's nice.
It was really cool.
Yeah.
And so that's the one cool thing about like having a memory, like whether like I had a similar experience with psychedelics, where I would like look back in my past, and a lot of the stuff that used to like piss me off, like growing up in San Francisco, I was a little bit overweight, I'm hearing impaired. I was kind of bullied. I was like really sensitive. Yeah. And so, but that little city, I needed to get out. I needed to explore. Right. So that's when I started traveling quite a bit. And but every time I came back to San Francisco, there was always those associations that were still like baggage on me. And then it wasn't until recently when I had that magic flow bus, and I took everybody on a tour, which basically was my childhood. Yeah. And like healed all those memories, and realized that like everybody's doing their best, including like the people that were like bullying me. Like they didn't know any better, and I was like sort of like they were the perpetrator, I was the victim. We needed each other, right? And so I was able to see it for what it is, because I don't know, maybe I like saw it from more of an objective point of view. And then now I can have those memories, but there's no like polarized like emotional tags to it where it's creating that response in the system. And that's what's really interesting to me, what we're all like into with like the ice and exposing ourselves to sort of perceived danger or even actual danger, and like how do we respond in those moments, and we're never taught that in school. We're just kind of like dumped into the world. And my thing now is like how can we use these tools to help people like face, so that they could have like the life that they dreamed of. Because I've been really fortunate, but a lot of times, cause like I can't look at myself in the mirror and like feel like I failed or I missed. I have to like, if I do fail or miss something, I need to go back to it and like and master it. Like figure out the skill to get to that same situation and not have the old response. It's like more empowered, where I wasn't a victim anymore, you know?
Yeah, it's, you know, we, there's a couple of things that you said that really sparked me. One is way sensation initially enters our body. So I hang out with a lot of neuroscientists, right? They're smarter than me, but I try to translate them into language that is understandable. So when you first encounter something, let's just talk about ice now, because people sort of have this conceptual feeling about what it's like. So at first, your body has these nerves in it. And you go into an experience like the ice, and those nerves send a signal, and it goes initially into your paralimbic system, so bottom of the brainstem. And it goes in as volume. It doesn't have anything else. It doesn't have ice. It doesn't have pain. It doesn't have anything. It's just volume of this sensation. And then it moves a little bit further up in the brainstem to the limbic system, where it bonds and the emotion that you're feeling at that moment with that volume control. And then it bonds and it creates what a neurologist would call a symbol. And that symbol is then how it encodes ice from then on. It becomes a sort of metaphor that your brain works with. So the emotion was separate, and then the volume button was separate. It combined it into this shortcut. And the next time you experience that experience, it doesn't go to the volume control again in the paralimbic. It goes to the symbol system. So you're always referring to that thing that you've already sort of made, instead of like seeing the raw data, which can be very empowering. This is also why you get PTSD. You have the traumatic event that occurred, whatever it is, right? It could be a rape, it could be a soldier in a war zone, it could be an attempted murder, whatever, you pick your poison here, shark attack, right? Then that sensations that you're feeling a myriad of sensations, your heartbeat, you're feeling the air around you, whatever, and there's tons of sensation, that it comes in as a very high volume, right? Which means that everything that you're feeling right now could be a potential trigger later. And then that triggers your PTSD. Now, if you're able to re-encode that symbol in some way, and psychedelics are a great way to do this, right? Because you go back to that event and then you see it from several different perspectives, the shark's perspective and your perspective and the water's perspective, whatever it is that you're seeing, right? And that re-encodes it in a way. I mean, you still need to do therapeutic work. You still need, I'm not saying this is like super easy, but that re-encoding is something that then you can use to sort of change your body. And for me, one thing that was really amazing with this re-encoding was again with ice water, and I was running this obstacle course race in England. This was one of the chapters in What Doesn't Kill Us, and it's the coldest obstacle course race in the world, supposedly. People run it in wetsuits, so they're covered in neoprene and they're running. It's like a 10-mile course or a 12-mile course or something. And it's the normal things. You're jumping over obstacles. You're crawling under things. You're getting wet. You're going up and down hills. All that stuff, which is great. I showed up on the starting line in like a bathing suit and shoes. I wish I'd had a Speedo, but couldn't find it in time. I wanted an American flag Speedo. This happened in the UK. Couldn't find one in time. So I'm here on the starting line, sort of freezing, and other people in their wetsuits, sort of getting ready. And then we start, and I went from miserable to being like, hey, this is fun. I am going to be jumping over things and crawling under things and getting muddy, and it sort of reinvokes this sort of childhood emotional experience of fun. And then I said to myself very specifically, that sensation on your skin is the sensation of fun. And holy shit, that worked. That turned into heat. I was like warm the whole time. These other people are shivering in their fucking wetsuits.
Yes.
And it's because I'm like, this isn't my emotional trauma experience. You know, this isn't ice and horror. This is me having a really good time. And that worked in this sort of metabolic change because I reinterpreted.
I remember reading that section in the book, and you had like a smile like the whole way through, and they're like, "We've never seen anybody in the history of this event smile the whole time." Yeah,
and it's like this really cool trick, and I think that, and I'm not going to say you can smile away your PTSD, right? But to some degree, there's an element of that re-encoding, which is very important to think about the neurology and to think about, oh look, this, you know, with PTSD. Every sensation, it was like listen to your heartbeat, which is omnipresent. It's because your heartbeat probably went up, booming in your ears. It was the sensation of the skin or the shark tooth or whatever it was. And every time you have anything like that, it triggers something because that volume button was so high. But if you can re-trigger some of those things and rebond them in various ways, now you're on the road to recovery because not everything's going to trigger that response.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the literature they call it reframing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you can expose yourself to that, and then it doesn't have that same trigger,
right?
Yeah, and so then you have like these things that sort of just like happen to you, and then you can like start to like actively like dive into certain events and learn to like. And that's where Wim Hof thing was amazing for me too, because like it's like, oh, okay, this is not like ice or cold. This is a sensation now,
right?
You know, like I could feel it as neutral, and then I could reframe it as like pleasure,
right?
You know, and then like I remember when I was learning like boxing from this like boxing pro, he was like a Showtime HBO world champion or whatever, and we would get into these like burnouts, and he would just say, keep smiling, keep smiling, keep smiling.
Interesting.
And I was just like, oh my god, this is like I'm burning out, my arms are like turning into noodles, keep smiling, keep smiling. And, you know, and my heart pounding in my throat, and I'm like, you know, about to like pass out, and he's like, keep smiling. And it was amazing like lesson, man. Like you literally, we had that capacity in like these panic modes to like reframe it and gain control of ourselves.
Right. There's still a physical limit, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you know, you're still boxing. You know, eventually you're
smiling and croak over.
It's not like this like burst past every conceivable thing, but it's certainly like, you know, your own physical limits are different than your emotional limits, and getting those in sync, you know, is really one of the goals that we can have in life. I mean, you can have many goals in life. Your goal in life could be, I want to sit at a desk in a climate control office in front of under fluorescent lights my whole life and be perfectly adapted to that.
Code.
And you can do that, man. We've gotten really good at that.
Yeah, totally. Some people, like get your, you know, Amazon Fresh, like delivered and pizza and and,
you know,
VR hooked up,
and that's its own like that's its own little ninja, right? Yeah. We have that sort of like widget ninja that we've become,
or like a soldier or somebody like they choose these like occupations, these paths, and like that's what they want to do. Like if somebody wants to fight and get their head kicked in, you know, they fully like love it. Right. I mean, obviously, there's all these upsides and downsides to it, but your point is that to sync up the mental and the physical, because are there really physical limits? Like we meet someone like Wim Hof now, like we're starting able to be able to do these things. These people are doing like ultra marathons now, and it's like.
If you just keep on adding ultras, it just gets more and more badass. Like if you just say it over and over again, you're like, oh man, he did 7 ultras.
Oh man, that was so good, man. Yeah, totally. Would be good. We're at a minute, an hour and 10.
Oh shit, you guys are getting bored. Our listeners are getting bored.
How are you, man? You want to keep going, or?
I think that they're not going to want to listen to it anymore.
That was pretty packed, man. That was pretty fun. So
I think what they need to do, I'm gonna plug my book. I'm going to say download the audiobook for What Doesn't Kill Us, because obviously you've been able to listen to us for an hour, so you can last for 9 if you want this to continue. The other, and there's all the Facebooks and the Instagrams and whatever.
Yeah, Scott Carney.
Yeah, Scott Carney's my name. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that crap is out there. Cool.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks for coming on. That was really fun. I can't wait to do it again. I can't wait to, that next book coming out.
I know. Still working on it. It'll be out in a year or 2, but it's gonna be badass. So don't worry.
Yeah,
it's gonna be worth the wait.
Sort of like part 2 of What Doesn't Kill Us, huh?
In a way, yeah.
It's a continuation.
It's a continuation of my life's journey, which started doing organ trafficking stuff, and there's sort of a through line between everything I do. But yeah, it's gonna be badass. People who like What Doesn't Kill Us will also like this book.
Man,
so.
you had quite a life, dude.
It's been fun.
Yeah, there's so much we can time into. Yeah, well, thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah.
And check out Scott Carney and get that book, What Doesn't Kill Us.
Yeah, man. All right, good luck, and we'll do something again soon.
See you guys.
Bye.